Hey everybody, it's Lotus Moon. Gosh, it's so good to be back. Like I mentioned before, complications stalled the project once again for a little longer than expected, but happily we can get back on track now. Let's see what happens with Inverno and Key Signature today. I'm sure it'll be interesting to see how Inverno's music lessons turn out today. Inverno in F minor. Written by Craig Dinkwell. Chapter 17. A Lesson in Moss Trot in D major. The next morning, after breakfast was eaten and schedules given out for the day, Inverno went straight to the music room where he found his teacher waiting for him.
Good morning.
Key nodded.
I thought that before we dive into today's lesson, I think we should take a bit of a field trip.
A field trip?
Inverno raised an eyebrow.
We're just going to be wandering around,
the professor said, taking the lead.
Now come on, there's much to see.
Confused, the young unicorn followed the elder stallion through the corridors.
Where are we going?
He asked.
Since you're technically not allowed to leave the palace, I'm going to do the next best thing. I'm going to show you the lives of those who keep this palace running.
Why? How does this have anything to do with music?
Inverno questioned.
It's something that I have to show you in order for you to understand today's lesson.
They passed by hallways and down staircases until they reached the lower levels of the palace, a place where a small army of maids, butlers, waiters, cooks, and even some of the guards conducted many of their duties. Inverno was shown the clothes and sheets washed in the laundry rooms, the intense focus of the cooks in gigantic kitchens, the complex system of dishwashers as they cleaned each and every piece of fine china. The colt heard the ringing of bells, the commanding orders from the head butlers, cooks, and maids, the flop of wet laundry, the clinking sound of silverware, the scrape of armor as the guards walked by. Yet, amongst the chaos, Inverno noticed that there's a kind of harmony out of all of them, like pieces of a restless timepiece. Sometimes a laundrymaid would ask a guard to help unload a pile of clothes into the soapy water. Other times, waiters would ask butlers to straighten out their tray sets. At the same time, neither he nor his teacher went unnoticed by the workers. Nearly all of them tried to keep a distance from the cult. Whenever Inverno entered any of the rooms, he would receive looks, some anxious, while others held nothing but despise. Let the monster in, Inverno heard one of the maids mutter through her teeth.
Careful. He might take over the Empire any day now,
whispered a butler.
Maybe he's here to crack the whip on us.
A cook muttered into a pot he was mixing. Annoyance and shame. That was what Inverno felt as they passed by. Even as they made their way back to the music room, Inverno could still feel their cold looks on him.
You're right,
Professor Key asked.
Do you think I'm a monster?
This made his teacher stop dead.
What?
Inverno repeated his question.
Why do you ask that?
Well, those servants said that I'm a monster. So, am I?
Do you really think that you're a monster?
Well, no, but...
The young unicorn trailed off.
Yes?
The professor raised an eyebrow. Inverno sighed and said,
Look, Key?
The elder stallion glanced towards him.
I don't really know what to think. My papa said that a monster is some scary thing that kills everything for no reason. He told me that the princesses of the south, Celestia and Luna, were monsters because they would do awful things to their subjects. But now, after meeting them and finding out what Papa really did, I don't know. I mean, you saw what happened when I got angry, right?
Yes,
Signature nodded.
I remember.
It got me thinking. Could it be possible that I might become a monster?
Do you want to?
No.
Then don't.
Professor Key interrupted.
As simplistic as it might sound, being a monster can be easy to give into, but it's not your only option. Understand? What your papa did shouldn't determine what you want to do.
Try telling the servants that.
Inverno replied with a scowl. Sighing, the elder stallion walked forward.
Mind if I tell you a story? And yes, it does have something to do with today's lesson.
What story?
I don't think you know much about Mozart, do you?
Inverno shook his head.
Well then, W.A. Mozart is today considered one of the greatest composers that ever lived, high up there with Bach and Beethoven. We'll get to him later. Anyway, when Mozart was 4, his father discovered that he was not only able to understand music quicker than his other children, but he could play and write music too. He started writing his first concerto piece when he was 4 years old, his first symphony at 7, and an entire opera when he was 12.
So he's been writing music since I've learned how to write music too?
More or less. As I was saying, Mozart's father saw that at an early age that not only could his son write music brilliantly, but he could play magnificently as well. So, for the sake of becoming rich, his father took the family to tour the great kingdoms of the day. As time went on, the young Mozart grew ever so restless with his father. He wanted to make a name for himself other than the little genius underneath his father's ever overprotective eyes. Well, one day he broke away from his father to become his own stallion and worked for both himself and for commissions. At first, things went well with him. His operas was getting noticed, kings and emperors praised his music, and one day he ended up marrying the mare he loved. However, the father didn't approve of their marriage, so you could imagine that the both of them were quite upset with the other. They were so mad at one another that Mozart wrote to a friend, "My father is nothing but an upright, bit-pinching, arrogant miser that cares more about how much bits we have made than the music I have written." Pretty harsh, no?
What's bit pinching?
Inverno asked.
It means someone who is always too stingy about money, making sure that they hardly spend anything that isn't useful.
The professor explained.
For a while, the two of them had come to despise each other, until one day, Mozart heard the news that his father had died. Even though they were angry at each other, deep down, Mozart still loved his father. So he became depressed, even angry, and sometimes blamed his sudden death upon himself. But what he did next was something that had never happened before.
What's that?
Inverno tilted his head.
He composed another opera called Don Giovanni. It's the darkest of all his opera. You see, at the end of it, a spirit comes on stage to accuse the villain that if he doesn't apologize for his crimes, he shall be dragged down to Tartarus. What Mozart actually did was that he wrote his father into that character, basically to accuse his own son for all to see and hear for the crimes that he committed against him. In other words, he captured his distress, his anger and fears of the future into music for the entire world to sympathize with him.
By this point, they had arrived at the music room. When they entered, Inverno noticed that the phonograph was in the room too, along with a pile of records sitting on top of the piano.
It was from this experience that Mozart discovered something important.
Professor Signature went on.
He discovered that he could use real-life experiences from himself and those around to create wonderful music. You see, music up to this point was only written for those who were powerful and wealthy, a kind of background music to demonstrate their greatness to any pony that came in contact with them. Molstrot did something different. Not only did he make music personal for the very first time, he wrote music for everyone to enjoy. He did this by breaking the opera tradition of only myths and legends are only used in opera. Instead, he created music about realistic everyday events.
So, something like writing a piece of music that reflects some pony's life, like any of the servants?
Exactly.
Key said, putting a record on the turntable.
He pioneered the idea that through music, he could make the ordinary become legends, and they, the legends, become ordinary.
So, what are you doing?
Inverno inquired as he saw his teacher crank up the phonograph before putting the needle on the record.
Let me play you a little something,
he said, as the music began to flow out of the machine. The professor sat down on the piano bench and took out a pencil with a notepad. He added,
Now, tell me what you see.
Inverno stood there for a moment as the fast-paced march sprang to life. As expected, his eyes widened, and the colt immediately looked around the room.
I see servants. Lots of them. This whole place is crowded with them. There's too much talking going around. Something about getting ready, I think. Butlers are checking waiters and maids making sure the ceiling is polished.
He said.
The ceiling?
He inquired, taking down his notes.
Yeah, there's a giant mirror on the ceiling, and those Pegasi maids are polishing the cloths.
What are they doing now?
I don't know. They're going all over the place. Some of them are carrying laundry, others silver plates, and there are those that are trying to tell every pony what to do. It's really weird, though.
Inverno answered.
What is?
That it's all servants. There's no master or anything. It's just servants doing stuff.
It was right then that Professor Key lifted the phonograph's needle.
That's exactly what Molstrot was intending. This comes to my point that his music tends to capture the grandeur of not just those in power, but for common ponies as well.
But why, though?
Inverno asked, his eyes returning to normal.
Why make music for everyone?
I'm glad you asked. At the time Molstrot was writing his music, it was all taking place during what is now known as the Age of Enlightenment. It was during this time that a revolutionary idea had begun to take place, an idea that Celestia had adopted into her rule for centuries, is that all ponies, servants or nobles, bakers or musicians, are all created equal, where all ponies shouldn't be judged by what they are, or where they're from, or what their cutie mark represents, or even what class they belong to, but by the character that they put forth. The same line of thinking goes to stallions and mares, zebras and griffins, kings and subjects, that they are all deep down, living, thinking, and feeling beings.
The professor said.
In music, Molstrot was one of the composers that adopted the Enlightenment into his music, where each instrument, each voice, and even melodies have their chance to shine.
Inverno scratched his head.
Huh? Well, that's new. Could you play something else from Molstrot?
I can.
Key went over to the phonograph, taking up a particular record to be played.
And one more thing.
Inverno added before his teacher could put the needle on the record.
When am I going to start playing?
Professor Signature thought for a moment.
I'll tell you what. Tomorrow I'll bring something for you to play. Would you prefer to do it on the organ?
The colt shook his head.
I want to play the piano,
he answered.
Oh, fair enough.
His teacher said, switching the phonograph on for the record to spin. And that concludes Chapter 17 to Inverno in F minor, written by Cracked Inkwell. My, that was quite surprising. The music for this chapter was quite lovely, but to think Inverno still faces such, well, prejudice from every other pony. I guess it's not to be a surprise considering who his father is. But couldn't they at least give him the benefit of the doubt? Perhaps things will get better pretty soon. Every pony, thank you for your patience in waiting for this next reading. The next chapter will be ready quite soon. Until then, please wait in your seats. There's still a long road ahead of us.